Hello, Perianne.
Hey, Peter.
Good to see you out in Texas. Sorry we didn't get to record, but I think this has worked out better because I want to talk to you about everyone's favorite senator, Elizabeth Warren.
Okay. I don't know about favorite, but favorite to love or favorite to hate?
Well, I mean, that was just my British sarcasm, really. Just, favorite to hate right now. What's going on with Elizabeth Warren? Come on, give me the big picture. What am I missing here? Because she historically has been someone who has held the banks to account. She has campaigned against Wall Street. She says she stands for the little guy. And it's almost like there's a 180 now. She is standing side to side with the banks and attacking freedom and the little guy. And I like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's really been a conundrum to see how her career has changed and evolved. I mean, I was working on the Hill when she was campaigning to join the Senate. And she had previously served as the head of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She was very much one of the key architects in pulling that together. And her whole career was really based on fighting for the consumer. And she had very much challenged the banks in a number of ways. She was never a friend to the banks. She was very critical of a lot of the practices at the banks, particularly the big banks. And that's what she campaigned on, and that's what she was elected into office, was on that platform. So fast forward to the age of Bitcoin and crypto, and she has become the anti-crypto senator. In fact, if you go to her campaign's website, they proudly present on the homepage of the campaign's website that she's leading the anti-crypto army, which is very combative. So that's her stance, that's her position, and she's trying to get as many members of Congress, as many members of the Senate to fall in line. We've watched her over the years and how she's changed and evolved. How do you go from being the voice of retail investors to being completely against consumers in their pursuit to invest in this new asset class? And it's been interesting. I've had some private conversations with friends of mine that work on the Hill, just kind of like things that are happening behind the background. One of the things that I've heard is that her campaign staff, particularly her marketing team, has a lot of leeway, and she trusts them to kind of just do whatever. And what they have found is that anytime Elizabeth Warren says the word crypto, or mentions this space, they get a lot of clicks on their website. They get a lot of news coverage. So a piece of it is a campaign strategy where all news is good news, really, no matter what it is, because it drives people to the website. The more people on the website, the more people are making donations. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why she's been, out there, is because she's a politician. She has to campaign. There's that piece of it. And then the other side is, how did she get so aligned with the banks on this issue? And there's a lot to unpack there. Her main policy priority right now, she introduced a bill called the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act. This bill would effectively ban cryptocurrency in the United States under the guise of illicit finance. This bill was introduced in the previous congressional session. It didn't really get any traction. She reintroduced it in the current congressional session, and it's gained a lot more traction. So we're now on the ground here in DC, driving a whole campaign to combat this bill that would be absolutely devastating for the industry and for the United States as well. But it's been a really incredible evolution to see. And I think we should be asking a lot of questions about what is her intent and why, because to me, it's questionable.
Oh, wow. Okay, great intro. Loads to unpack here. I was actually just keeping notes because there were so many bits to cover first. Okay, look, the first thing I find a bit weird about this, because you say she gets coverage and it drives clicks to the website, but when you pick a different issue, if you pick something like global warming, and you could say maybe on the left they believe it's more of an issue than it is on the right. The right can be a bit more kind of pessimistic about it, but you kind of know where the electorate stand. Whereas this one, I don't feel like there is a huge anti-crypto movement within the electorate. There are some people like, oh, it's a scam or it's nonsense, but it doesn't feel like it. This feels like one of those issues that's primarily driven by politicians, media, and business, and primarily in business, I'd say banking, who are against it. So you find it a weird one that she'll get lots of clicks without actually knowing what those clicks are. That could be people like us going on and checking out what she's doing. I've just not found there is a massive anti-crypto movement amongst the voters. Am I missing something?
No, I don't think there is. No, I think you're right about that. But I think when you have a sitting U.S. senator making public statements against digital assets and cryptocurrency, that was very newsworthy. Because nobody else was really taking that type of a position. And so because she was out there early saying, crypto is bad for illicit finance, it's bad for consumer, saying anything negative, really going out very strong on the negative, it got her a lot of news coverage. So that drove coverage. Any type of coverage is bringing attention to their website. And I think that's like a piece of where it started. I don't think it was started in a deep-rooted understanding of the technology. We've spent quite a bit of time with her office and her team, at least in early days, trying to educate them, making a good faith effort to say, hey, we understand you have concerns. We'd like to talk to you about those concerns. We share concerns. We don't want to see illicit finance happening in any space, particularly in our space. Can we talk to you about, what the industry is doing about this? There has not really been a good faith effort to really understand the facts, understand the technology and how it works. I think it's more that this is my position. There's really nothing you can do to get me off of this position. And that is very, very disappointing to have in any elected official. It shouldn't be a political position that's driven by political issues. It should be, what's best for your constituents. And in order to get to that answer, you have to be willing to have an honest conversation. And particularly with her office, it's a very, very one-sided a one-sided conversation.
So would you say in that, with that respect of that, then the political system is entirely and utterly broken? Because I would echo you. I would want the people I'm voting for, I would want to vote for them based on the fact that they understand the issues that matter to me as a voter or to my community as voters, and address those issues. But it comes across to me that she's more interested in the incentives that drive her position of power, her retention of power, maybe even the increase of power that she gets within the Senate. And that says to me that everything's entirely broken. And then I look at, you can see the polls in terms of all-time low faith in the political system or faith in political parties. And then I'm like questioning, well, is that because, sorry, I'm going to throw a lot at you here, but is it because we know more now? Like in this modern media, digital age, social media, we have access to more information. Do we know more now? And has it always been this way? Or is it just, are we just living in a new paradigm where power has essentially become very, very centralized?
Yeah, I think over time it's just gotten worse. Today, we're very much in a two-party system. The U.S. is clearly in a two-party system. George Washington warned against having this two-party system because the pendulum swings so hard to the left and to the right and back and forth. And at some point, that pendulum breaks. And we may be close to that breaking point. I don't think the system's totally broken. I mean, the two-party system works. We clearly have two clear parties and is really designed to ensure that there's one Democrat and one Republican that's put forward to be voted into the presidency, as well as House and Senate and Congress. So I think it's working in terms of a two-party system, but I think questioning, is a two-party system what's right for the United States? Having a deep conversation about that is something a lot of people are actually looking to. There's a new political group called the Freedom Party I'm sorry, not the Freedom, the Forward Party. That's new, and they're looking to bring forward a new political party, and they're doing so not from the top down, where you have an independent or someone from the Green Party or the Libertarian Party try to get on the ballot. Those attempts over the past several decades have largely failed because of the two-party system is so strong. Typically, Democrats and Republicans get, the mass majority of the votes, and then whoever's on that third-party ticket gets like single digits. So it's very, very difficult to elect someone from a third party into office, into how the system is created. The Forward Party is working to create a whole new party, going from a grassroots, a bottom up approach, and they've raised a ton of money. So they run a super PAC here, and I think they had 24 candidates in the last election cycle, but they had 24 candidates that won. So there are a lot of people in the United States that are questioning, does the two-party system work? When it comes to Elizabeth Warren, I think it's more than just that. What we learned just a couple days ago, so she introduced this bill with Senator Marshall. So you have Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's Democrat, and then Roger Marshall is a Republican from Kentucky. And they're now kind of like the lead sponsors and voices for the bill. A member of my team attended a private event. It was an invite-only event for the national security community just a couple days ago, and Senator Marshall was one of the speakers. And in that meeting, Senator Marshall talked about the bill, the digital asset anti-money laundering legislation, which I'm calling AKA the Ban Crypto in the United States bill. He shared, and I don't think this was known, but he shared that the American Bankers Association wrote the bill.
What?
So he said, and we have a recording of it. We will be releasing it soon, so you can see it and hear it with your own eyes. But he said, we're concerned about illicit finance with crypto. So the first thing we did is we went to the American Bankers Association and said, how do we fix the issue? And that's where the bill came from. So that's now been shared privately, soon to be made publicly known by us. And at the funny thing, the crazy thing, he had, his notes that his staff wrote him. So he's at the podium. He forgot the name of the bill. He stumbles through just even saying the name of the bill. So, you can kind of tell he's relying on other people to, pull this legislative initiative together. He doesn't get the name right, stumbles through it, says, yeah, we went to the banks, the American Bankers Association, got us the language. And then he ends his talk by, and that's really all I know about crypto. So he also divulged that he doesn't have an understanding of the technology itself. So it's
pretty fucked.
Not just the two-party system. There's also undue influence by special interest groups. And that's why it's so important that our industry, our community, which is small compared to legacy industries, has a voice in DC, because if we're not here, you're not going to have any voice at all. And that's why we're working overtime, and that's why we've been doing this. We're in our 10th year of operations this year, and the fight is happening now. Things have really heated up, and I think we're in the and then they fight you stage, and then we win. And I think we're clearly winning. I think it's very, very clear that we're winning. It's just a matter of time.
That's like, sorry for the language, but that's utterly fucked that you've got somebody co-signing a bill who doesn't know what its name is and doesn't understand it. I mean, these people are meant to be writing policy that's best for the American people at large, not the American people who run the banks, who have clearly underserved us. Risky practices ever since 2008, maybe less so since 2008, but still. totally in cahoots with the White House. That to me is well. Then I question Perianne. I was like, well, what do you do about that in terms of these politicians? How is it not that these things are released, like your recording is released, the things about Elizabeth Warren are released? How do you not? Is there not some form of, I don't know, correct me here for my ignorance, some form of impeachment you can do against sitting senators? Is there an equivalent of a? Can you? Is it a recall? Is it what they do? I'm sorry, I don't understand U.S. politics enough, but to me, this is a combination of one, incompetence, and two, malice, and it's malice against the American people.
Yeah, it's rare for a member of Congress to step down. It's very difficult to force them to step down, that really, because the way, if you're in one of the 535 congressional seats, you have 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. You were elected, by your constituents in your district. So to kind of undo that process, we don't really want some type of czar saying you're now unfit to serve and you're no longer allowed to serve, because that can very quickly get out of hand. So there's not a lot of tools, but pressure from the people and also pressure from members of Congress, who, if they collectively get together and say, you've clearly violated your oath of office, you need to step down, then typically they voluntarily will step down out of shame. There's really no efforts to do that here with Elizabeth Warren or Senator Marshall. No one's really led that discussion or that charge. But it is quite disappointing that they would not consult technical experts before introducing, pushing, promoting a piece of legislation that would regulate the technology, right? I don't necessarily think there's a problem with, if you're writing a piece of legislation, I don't think there's a problem with asking the banks, what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you have input? I think everyone should be allowed to have input into the legislative process. The problem is that the bill would effectively ban cryptocurrency in the United States, and the way that they're promoting it and the way that they're getting more members of Congress to sponsor the bill is what they're saying is this will increase and tighten the illicit finance requirements on cryptocurrency. And that's really just, it's not true. It's grossly misinterpreting what the bill actually does. And I don't know if they truly get that. Again, because they didn't consult any technical experts, they're not willing to have a two-sided conversation. They're just talking to one group and they're getting one outcome. But in order to get the best policies for the nation as a whole, you've got to bring in the rest of the community, in which they've refused to do. And they've also refused to have a dialogue with the community. So I think that is very, very harmful. And it could have national security interest. I stated just yesterday that if we effectively banned Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in the United States, ban meaning passing a law saying it's making it illegal for companies or Americans to engage in this space, because you can't shut it down, but you can say it's illegal. What we're doing is, one, you're pushing all of the activity into a black market. So we want this activity to be regulated, right? Or at least, the policymakers do, the regulators. You want it to be in a regulated ecosystem, so they have jurisdiction. So if something goes wrong, they can step in. If it's totally in a black market, their jurisdiction looks very, very different, and their regulatory tools are significantly limited. It also completely cedes this technology to the rest of the world. I don't think you or I have any doubts that Bitcoin and blockchain technology are going to completely change global finance over the long term. We're still in early days, but the entire global financial and monetary system are going to be impacted by this technology. And by just saying, we don't think it's worth it, we don't think it has any value, we don't care, we don't want it here, it gives that technological advantage to our adversaries and to everybody else. And what is that going to do for our global standing?
Okay. Right. I tell you where I want to go with this now. Let's talk about the bill. Before we get into the bill, can you explain the legislative process? So a bill's written, co-signed. What is the process for a bill to get through and pass into law?
So any member of Congress, again, there's 535 members of Congress. Any member of Congress can introduce a piece of legislation, and then anyone in the world can go to congress.gov and read the legislation. So it's posted on a public website. The Congress has a central database, if you will, with all of the bills that are introduced. And there's thousands of pieces of legislation that are introduced every congressional session. A congressional session is 2 years. So we're in year one of this session. This current session ends at the end of 2024. So you can introduce a piece of legislation.
Sorry, is that after the election then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to that.
So this congressional session goes through December 2024. So we're about halfway done with the current congressional session. So any member of Congress can introduce a bill. It gets referred to the Committee of Jurisdiction. So Elizabeth Warren's Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, because it impacts the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department is under the jurisdiction of the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. So this bill was introduced in the Senate, so it gets referred to the Senate Banking Committee. And then the Senate Banking Committee would have to bring it forward for a vote, and it has to get voted out of committee. So the Committee of Jurisdiction has to first vote on it. Once it is voted out of committee, it goes to the Senate floor for a vote. And if it passes the Senate floor, then it gets sent to the House. And then the House has to take the bill up. So someone in the House would have to be willing to bring the bill forward in the House. It goes through the same process. It passes through the House Financial Services Committee first, which this bill would never be brought up in Financial Services. Patrick McHenry's already denounced the bill. Who chairs that committee? He's not bringing it forward. So there is a blockade that is in the House. So this bill really isn't going anywhere, at least for now. But if we had the right political, if the political dots lined up in a particular way, that could change over time. So it has to pass the House and then, or the committee, and then it goes to the floor of the House. If it passes the floor of the House, then the bill would go to the president's office to be signed into law. And he could veto it. He wouldn't have to sign it if he doesn't want to. So that's the legislative process overall. The Senate does not like bringing forward bills or passing bills. They just don't do a lot of legislating. It's kind of like the known secret in Washington. People don't talk about this a lot, but the number of bills that have actually been brought forward in committee and brought to the floor is, it's like a handful of bills over the past several years. So the legislative process, and I think it's good that it's very, very difficult to get a bill signed into law. The Congress was designed this way. But the problem is if we need something done urgently, it just takes a very, very long time for Congress to get, through all of these hurdles to be able to get a new bill passed into law.
So in our favor, the process takes a long time. There's a lot of hurdles to get through. But at the same time, you have high concerns about this bill. Do you think it's because there is more of a chance of this getting through than standard? What are the signals for you that this is more high risk?
Well, as I mentioned, we have successfully put forward a blockade in the House. So Republicans control the House. Republicans have already denounced this bill, at least the ones that control the respective Committee of Jurisdiction. So we don't have any concerns about this bill being brought up in the House, which means this bill is not becoming law, at least this Congress. But, the Congress changes every 2 years. We have an election every 2 years in the House. And that also impacts 1/3 of the Senate. So 1/3 of the Senate changes, or at least is up for a vote every 2 years, or up for re-election every 2 years. So in the event that Democrats controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency, could a bill like this get passed through? Potentially. The other problem with the DAML is the acronym, the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act. We call it DAML. Another concern about this bill is they're touting it as bipartisan. So because they have Senator Elizabeth Warren as a Democrat, as the lead Democrat, and Marshall as the lead Republican, they're technically saying that this is a bipartisan bill. And that's how they're promoting it. Again, we know Chairman McHenry is not going to bring this forward in House Financial Services, but he just announced that he's resigning at the end of this congressional session. He is not going to seek re-election in the next Congress. So come 2025, if we have a new House Financial Services chairman who maybe has an alliance with Senator Marshall, would they be interested in this bill? That's absolutely a risk that's out there. The bigger risk that I see is really the narrative. This bill has really shifted the conversation in Washington to should digital assets have the right to exist in the United States? And we have dozens of members of Congress who have signed on to this bill as a sponsor, and their answer to that question is no, which means we have many members of Congress who want to ban crypto today. That is very bad sentiment for our space. So we have a lot of work to do as an industry to articulate the value of this technology to ensure, and also to ensure we have elected people in office who are in line with the technology of the 21st century.
But there are people within the Senate who are pro-Bitcoin. Senator Cruz, Senator Lummis, that seem to be two of the most obvious ones. But is there nothing they can do to work against this, be a powerful voice of reason on the other side?
Absolutely. And they are. They absolutely are. Senator Lummis has really done a very good job of taking a measured approach where she's approaching the issue with substance, really understanding how the technology works, taking the time to build coalitions, alliances, relationships with her colleagues, explaining why this is good for the United States of America, why it's good for Wyoming. So you do also have opposing efforts underway. I truly believe that the majority of the members who have sponsored Elizabeth Warren and Senator Marshall's legislation don't actually understand that it would effectively ban cryptocurrency. My understanding in my conversations with my contacts on the Hill is that Senator Warren is the biggest anti-crypto lobbyist. She will approach other senators on the Senate floor, go up to them and say, I need you to sponsor this bill for me, and twist their arms to do so. And a lot of them have. And I don't think they've had any conversation with them to really understand, well, what exactly would this bill do? So I think there's a lot of people who are on the bill that don't actually understand what it does. So we are driving a big awareness campaign right now. Every single member of Congress, member of the Senate that's sponsored on this bill, we're reaching out to their office, and we're also encouraging their constituents to reach out and say, are you aware that this bill would effectively ban cryptocurrency in the US? It does not tighten anti-money laundering requirements for Bitcoin and for all blockchains. What it does is it pushes it overseas. So we're really trying to make sure offices truly understand that and make sure, is that really your position? Is that the position you're taking? And get them to clarify their position. And also, this is a big part of just what we do at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. It's a lot of education, being on the Hill every day they're in session, helping drive awareness, education, understanding, advancing policies that are good for our space. We've prevented a ton of members from co-signing onto this piece of legislation because we've taken the time to sit down with their team and explain it to them and make sure they fully understand exactly, if this was implemented, what would it mean? What does it look at the technical level, and how would that change the industry? And there's a ton of members who do understand that this is effectively a ban, and we shouldn't ban advanced technologies in the United States. We should embrace them and figure out how to regulate them appropriately. So we have prevented a lot of members from sponsoring, so that's good. But there's only about 20 of us at the chamber, and there's 535 of them. So we're doing everything we can to get our message out, but we need all the help we can get. And that's why, we encourage the industry to be involved in discussions with their policymakers.
We'll definitely talk about the chamber towards the end and talk about how we can help you as an industry and individuals. One of the things I really don't trust about Elizabeth Warren is every time I see her in a particular, I don't know what you call them, congressional hearing or a Senate testimony hearing.
The hearings, yeah.
Yeah, the hearing. Every time she's talking to somebody and asking questions to somebody that we know are going to give her the answers she wants, they don't feel like natural conversations on the floor. So if I compared her questioning someone to the likes of a Rand Paul, who I think just gets on the floor and asks very direct questions, every conversation she has looks very rehearsed. So she lands a specific point first, and then puts the question to the person. But they're always leading questions. And recently, the one with Jamie Dimon, it just felt like it was a very leading question where it was very rehearsed, and his answer was specifically what she wanted, was somebody to come out and say, well, if I was in government, I would ban it. It felt very rehearsed. And then not long after that, we got this Freedom of Information Act application, which released the emails between her and Chairman Gensler, where it implied this exactly happened. Now, again, my limited understanding of US politics and how the various agencies work, but I expect this is not how it's meant to work, and it's actually, I mean, I don't know if the words are legal, but it's against the rules of how members of the Senate liaise with these agencies.
It's all political theater. The hearings are very much political theater. Now, one of the main responsibilities of the committees, the congressional committees, is to provide oversight over the government agencies. So the Senate Banking Committee, which Elizabeth Warren is a member of, has jurisdiction over, the financial services regulators, including the Securities and Exchange Commission. They hold oversight hearings on a regular basis. They bring the heads of the agencies in, as well as other key personnel at the agencies in, where they have to testify in front of the committee, and the members of the committee can ask them anything, and they have to respond. And it goes into the congressional record, so it's all public. So Chairman Gensler came for his regular testimony in the Senate Banking Committee, and Elizabeth Warren's office had coordinated with Gary Gensler's ahead of time. It's not unreasonable for a member office to have some degree of coordination, because these agencies are very large and they oversee like many different things. It would be very normal for someone on the committee to say, please come prepared to discuss this topic or that topic, to make sure they're prepared to answer any inquiries that they have for them. So some level of coordination is fine. The level of coordination that was revealed in the FOIA Act, so the Heritage Foundation was able to uncover these emails between Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler's office. The level of coordination was very, very detailed and totally inappropriate. It even went so far as to say, where Elizabeth Warren's office said, we plan to say this, is that okay? Definitely don't want to put you on the spot. But the committee's job is to provide oversight of the agency. That is their job, to put them on the spot, to make sure they're doing their job. And if they don't do it, then who is? What was unveiled in those emails absolutely pulls into question
the independence.
At least Elizabeth Warren's office ability to provide oversight, because they clearly weren't in that particular instance. To have another, so the other hearing was with Jamie Dimon. They had all the main bank CEOs, or the big bank CEOs, came and testified last week. And, it seemed pretty clear that there is coordination as well. So this committee is also providing oversight to the banks. I mean, their direct oversight is with the bank regulators. The bank regulators oversee the banks themselves. So it's a couple degrees of separation there. But it does bring into question the oversight function and the effectiveness of this particular committee.
But can anything be done about that? Because to me, it just smells corrupt.
It does feel corrupt. Corruption is absolutely rampant across the United States, and we see it in every industry. It's one of my biggest fears for the future of our country. And a big part of it has to do with special interest groups, political fundraising, the way that we elect people into office and how people stay into office. We absolutely need political reform.
Okay, let's get into the bill. Okay, so I've loosely read the key points of the bill. It felt like heavy regulation, not effectively banning. But do you want to run through the details of the bill, the most the biggest concerning parts?
Yeah, the part that's most concerning of DAML, the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, is that it would consider miners, so a Bitcoin miner, node validators. So if you're, a node on any other blockchain, or a self-hosted wallet, like a non-hosted, non-custodial wallet, it would designate them as financial institutions and make them subject to the regulations that financial institutions are subject to.
So even my wallet, if I had a wallet and I was in the US, I would be a financial institution.
Your wallet would be considered a financial institution, which of course makes no sense. You can't implement that. You can't enforce that. A wallet is software, right? It can't comply. It's not taking custody. It doesn't have a customer. There's no customer relationship. That's why we're saying this legislation would effectively ban cryptocurrency because it's impossible to comply with. And so any business or people that, want to do business in the United States and don't want to get in trouble, they would say, well, we can't touch this because we technically can't comply. So that is what is most concerning. It does not take into account how the technology works. It makes it impossible to comply, and it severely jeopardizes the future of the entire technological ecosystem's ability to operate in the United States.
But that's like saying the wallet in my pocket that has dollar bills in it is a financial institution.
That's exactly right. And this is something that I personally am passionate about. So in the analog world, we have cash. We're provided a degree of privacy in financial transactions with cash. But somehow, as we're moving to the digital world, which technological progress is moving forward, we're moving into a global digital economy. The transition is very, very well underway. Somehow, the conversation has turned into, well, those privacy rights that you had in the analog world, they don't really transfer over into the digital world. Those are being taken from you. And it's our job, at least it's my job as an American, to fight for our rights and say, no, our privacy rights should also exist in the digital economy. And just the fact that a transaction is digital does not mean that I have to cede that constitutional protection. That's what the fight is.
Is this unconstitutional? Is there any specific parts of the Constitution? Is it the Fourth or the 14th Amendment where there has to be some kind of suspicion?
Yeah, the Fourth Amendment. So and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but we could do a whole nother podcast bringing someone else that's studied the Constitution at that level. But unreasonable search and seizure. So we have a right to privacy, and you shouldn't have the feds, authorities going through your things, whether that's your financial transactions or your physical assets, unless you're served a warrant.
So can laws such as this be challenged constitutionally?
I think they can. I do think they can, and that may be where it ends up. If again, the Digital Asset Money Laundering Act, it's not going to be passed into law this Congress. There is no process for it to pass through all the necessary steps to become law. So we're just not there. I think it would be very difficult for the Congress to be in a position where this would pass, because I think we're moving towards more pro-Bitcoin policymakers than anti. With an election coming up, I do think we will have more pro-Bitcoin people in office than we do currently. So I think the likelihood of it ever become passed into the law is relatively low. And the fact that it was, I do think it could be challenged in a court of law. I hope it would be. I'd be willing to lead that charge. And the courts are, one of the most important kind of bastions of justice that we have left. We've had a lot of wins in the courts recently for our space. The courts are incredibly important, such an important player in digital asset policy. So I don't see any reason why it would not, in the extent that it got to that point, which right now it's not.
So your primary concern in the short term is the narrative that this is leading, and that Elizabeth Warren is going on major news stations with an anti-crypto / Bitcoin agenda, which may be convincing people unnecessarily that this is an asset or a space that we should fear because it's being used by North Korea and drug traffickers, which we know is a nonsense. But your longer term fear is changes to the House. If the Democrats follow the election with control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there is a longer term tailwind risk that actually this could become law.
In the right environment, it's absolutely possible. We're not in that environment now, and we're not predicting we'll be in that environment, at least the next Congress. It's really hard to predict past future elections or multiple elections, but we're not in that position today, which is good. This is an issue that's evolved a lot. So let me give you a little bit more history. So during the Trump administration, or at the very end of the Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin, so the Treasury Secretary, Trump's Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, tried to basically put the same law into effect. There were these self-hosted wallet rules. You may remember because it was all over the news. We made a huge deal about it. And it happened at exactly this time during the last year of President Trump's year in office. It was over the Christmas holiday that I was working on this and that this all blew up. Secretary Mnuchin tried to bring rules through the Treasury that would have done something very similar to what the DAML Act does. And it would have, essentially made it impossible or illegal to have self-hosted wallets or to use self-hosted wallets here in the United States. We challenged that very hard. Our team at the chamber pushed back when we became aware of this effort, and we threatened to sue the Treasury Department. We had to hire a team of litigators, and we sent a letter to Secretary Mnuchin saying, we will sue you if you bring this forward. And those regs did not come forward. They published they changed the structure of them. They did not end up becoming law. So the Treasury tried to do something very similar several years ago under the Trump administration that would have had, kind of equally devastating consequences. The Treasury knows that the industry will sue because that's already been put forward, and they haven't brought this back up. Instead, we're seeing Elizabeth Warren's bill. So I think we made a lot of progress with Treasury making it very, very clear that, we will absolutely take this to court and you're not going to win. And so I think they gave up on that path. Instead, now they're going to Congress and say, well, we'll have Congress pass the law for us. Because if Congress passes a law, it's a little bit different. So that's why I say I think in the long term, we're winning. Like, we're in that and then they fight you stage. And to me, it's pretty clear that we're winning. It's a little bit dirty in the rink right now. But it's pretty clear to me in the long term that this technology is not going anywhere, and there's going to be winners and losers into how it's adopted across the world, and that is the impetus for these battles.
It is strange that this is happening at the same time. It appears, obviously, there's no confirmation. It appears the spot ETFs are going to get approved. So it's almost like they're giving with one hand and taking away with the other. And then I wonder is it because they know they can't ban it? And if they can't really ban it directly, they essentially want to build like a banking layer for Bitcoin. So yes, you can use it. You can use a derivative, but ultimately the Bitcoin that exists, that is held by Americans, exists either within a custodian. Well, actually, not. It's basically every Bitcoin that's owned is with a custodian. So you lose the ability to self-custody, which means you're at risk of being rugged by one of these institutions, but you still can effectively have exposure to the asset because these institutions will give you that exposure. Do you think that's maybe what they're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting theory. It is very possible that all this is all political theater just to scare the American people from investing in Bitcoin. It's like, okay, well, we can't like put forward unconstitutional regulations. The Congress, we're not going to be able to pass something through Congress. So instead, we're just going to do a PR campaign and scare everybody. And maybe that will prevent everyone from dumping their U.S. dollars and buying Bitcoin. That's very possible. We have seen a lot of delay tactics out of the regulators. I do think the spot Bitcoin ETF saga, that whole thing was just a delay tactic. And I've said for years, getting a spot Bitcoin ETF is a win, not an if scenario. We absolutely will have one. Because of the regulatory process. The regulatory process allows for it. We've just had people in power, the chairman of the SEC, including Chairman Clayton and including Chairman Gensler, who have arbitrarily denied these applications, which is illegal, by the way, and they were sued for that, and they lost the lawsuit. That Grayscale bought for it. So now they have to move forward. But all of these denials that we saw from the SEC over a 10-year period, I think it very much was a delay tactic of like, we don't really like it. We don't really want it. Even though we're not allowed to, we're going to, pick the winners and the losers. And right now, Bitcoin is a loser. We don't want this to come forward in an ETF, and we're going to use all the tools we have in our regulatory toolbox to delay this from coming forward. But the reckoning time has come. Again, they were sued. They lost the lawsuit. It's happening. It's happening whether they wanted to or not. It is absolutely happening.
Okay, that's interesting. So these, look, the rumors are very strong. There's lots of signals in terms of the various applications and amendments to the applications from the likes of BlackRock, Fidelity, etc. And so you're effectively saying is that reluctantly they've had to accept these are going to exist, because if they could have delayed further, they would have. So have we essentially hit the point of they can't stop this anymore? Is that what you're saying?
The SEC has one more delay tactic. So on the Grayscale case specifically, so they could bring grounds and say, well, now we're going to deny this application for another reason. However, that would be pretty ridiculous because for 10 years, the SEC has said, we're not approving these applications for one reason. And that's been, the reasoning for 10 years. So then 10 years later, after they've lost their lawsuit, to say, oh, actually, it was this reason we're denying would look, pretty ridiculous. Although we've seen things, a lot of very ridiculous, nothing would surprise us at this point. So there is still at least one more tool in the SEC's toolbox to continue to delay. But I think they're reaching the very, 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 very end of that.
Yeah. And then I do wonder, with someone like BlackRock coming in quite late with their ETF application and the language used by Larry Fink publicly, did BlackRock independently just think, oh, this is a good time for an ETF? Or is it the fact that the SEC have got to that point where they've got to allow them, and they would rather someone like BlackRock have an ETF than like fairly unknown, more hostile companies like Grayscale and giving it to the crypto companies?
We don't know. That information is not made public, so there's no way to know for sure. I mean, what I would say is that we want the rules applied equally across across all market participants. We don't want anyone to have special treatment. So anyone should be allowed to apply to bring any type of exchange traded product forward, and if they meet the requirements to do so, then their product should be allowed to move forward.
Okay, that's maybe just my gut instinct of what is happening. Okay, so let's talk about the ETFs themselves specifically before we wrap up, and then we'll talk about the chamber at the end, because you should tell us the work you're doing and how we can help. So what is the current status of the ETFs? I know there's various applications that have been in. There seems to be a lot of amendments being done, which seem to be, it's almost like they're lining up a horse race for January. What's your interpretation of where we are?
So the CEO of Grayscale gave an interview on CNBC about 2 weeks ago, and he said, he shared publicly with the press that Grayscale is now in active discussions to convert the Grayscale trust into an ETF, to allow for redemptions and to open it up to an open-end mutual fund. So our understanding is that Grayscale is in the process of launching their spot Bitcoin ETF, and their conversations with the SEC are all about the logistics of bringing it to market. That is what the CEO shared just a couple of weeks ago. We do not know the timing. We will not know the day it goes forward. That'd be considered insider information. So that information is not shared outside those specific parties. There are many different applications that are out there. Some of what we're hearing is that it's very possible that the SEC controls the timing. So the SEC could take all of the institutions that have filed to bring a spot Bitcoin ETF to market, a similar product to market. They could get it organized so they all launch at the exact same time. Or they could decide someone gets to go first and someone else gets to go last. Again, we don't know that information either. What I will say is whoever goes first gets an incredible advantage.
It would feel a little bit unfair then to pick a winner.
Yeah, and the SEC is a disclosure regulator. They're not a merit regulator. They're not supposed to pick winners and losers. So they absolutely need to take that into account, and they need to come up with a process that's equitable for all parties.
So you can't confirm or deny that this is all going to get approved on January the 10th?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's very possible.
I'm just teasing you.
Yeah. I don't have that information. If I did, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
All right. Well, listen, you should tell us a bit more about what the Chamber of... is it Chamber of Digital Assets?
Chamber of Digital Commerce.
I was going to say that. But for some reason I thought, because when you say in digital assets, I was like, shit, have I forgotten it? Okay, the Chamber of Digital Commerce. You're obviously doing some really good work up there on the Hill, supporting our industry, which we massively appreciate. But just tell us a bit more about what it is you do and how people can support you.
We're a nonprofit. We're fighting for the future of Bitcoin and the digital asset industry. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. We're focused on public policy issues, and we represent companies that are building in the Bitcoin, in the digital asset, in the crypto space. So our team is on the ground in Washington, fighting to make sure the digital asset anti-money laundering bill will never become law. We're also fighting to promote laws that would help grow Bitcoin in the U.S. For example, one of our big wins this year was changing the accounting rules for Bitcoin. So one of the biggest barriers to the corporate adoption of Bitcoin is we don't have accounting standards, and that up until recently, Bitcoin was considered an intangible on the balance sheet, which is incredibly punitive. And we got that changed to fair market value with the FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So we're fighting to break down big walls and big barriers to the adoption of this technology, and fighting to make sure that policies that would ban or inhibit the growth of it in the U.S. Never see the light of day. We're very active in the courts. We're not shy to threaten lawsuits, to bring lawsuits, to file briefs. And we do need the industry's support for what we do. We do have a C3, so I know it's the end of the year and a lot of people are making their charitable contributions at this time. So if you're interested in contributing on our website, if you make a donation on our website, you'll get a receipt and you can get a full tax donation for that. But it's critically important that we have champions and advocates on the ground in Washington, making sure that the future of Bitcoin and the future of blockchain technology is here and it's here to stay.
Did you say your team's 25 people, 22 people?
We've got about 20 people, and we're headquartered in DC, and the mass majority of our team is here in the office in DC.
So 20 people in DC, and being willing to litigate can't be cheap. So it must be an expensive thing to run. Are you getting enough support, or is it a case of whatever amount, there's always more that can help.
Yeah, I mean, there's always more we can do. So we turned 9 years old this year. We're in our 10th year of operations. We've always operated. I think we carry a lot of weight. I mean, we are, I guess, considered a small trade association or advocacy association in the grand scheme of things. But we are the largest for our industry, and the more resources we can do, the more that we can do. And I'll say, the fights have really heated up. I mentioned on our chat today that we're in the fight you stage. The policy conversations have really evolved since we started 9 years ago. We didn't have full on, we weren't in full on combat mode, even just a couple of years ago. So now is the time to really press in. And that's exactly what we're doing. And any and all support matters.
There will be some people listening, Perianne, because my show is called What Bitcoin Did. They'll be like, stop talking about digital assets, stop talking about crypto, stop talking about blockchain. It's all that matters is Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin that matters. So why is it that you do have this broader remit? What are we missing?
Well, when it comes to working with policymakers, there's very few instances where we would talk about, a Bitcoin law. Most of the laws are written in a technology agnostic way. So if we said we can only speak to the technology of Bitcoin, we really wouldn't be that strong of a resource to our regulators and to our policymakers. So we really want to, be a one-stop shop for members of Congress, for the policy-making community to understand this technology as a whole. I totally sympathize with the Bitcoin maxi community. I mean, I'm a very, very, very early Bitcoiner. I first learned about Bitcoin in 2011. We launched the chamber in 2014. I was one of the first, if not the first, international reporters to report on Bitcoin in 2013. So I come from the Bitcoin community when it was just Bitcoin because there was nothing else out there. But I'm also, a free market person, and I think Bitcoin is, it clearly is the free, values the free market. So if other people, I think it is important that we're kind of careful in the way that we say other things shouldn't exist because that can be used against you. I think the free market should determine those forces. So everyone is free to invest in what they want. And if you invest in something that ends up going to zero, that's the consequence. So we don't want to pick winners and losers. We don't want the government picking winners and losers. I'm obviously a very, very big supporter of Bitcoin. But when we're talking about the laws, they're not Bitcoin laws. It's the terms we're using are digital assets, digital tokens, convertible virtual currencies. And we are very pro Bitcoin. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but we just launched the Digital Power Network, which is we represent over 50% of the Bitcoin hash rate that's generated in the United States. And we're advocating and telling the story about how Bitcoin mining is a tool that's helping advance domestic energy security. So there are very specific narratives around Bitcoin that we're driving, but I think there's a little bit more to the story.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting the way you put it. Is I guess for a regulator, when they regulate against the technology, and whilst say Bitcoin and Litecoin are very different brands, different reasons to use them. In terms of the technology, there isn't a huge amount of difference, and there certainly isn't any difference to a regulator. You can't regulate the blockchain of Litecoin differently from the blockchain of Bitcoin. I guess that's kind of what you're saying.
Right. So in terms of tax laws, for example, convertible virtual currencies is the term that the IRS uses. That's the definition. So that includes, any cryptocurrency. They're they're taxed as commodities, and so or property. So they're subject to capital gains tax. So regardless if you invested in Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ether or whatever, you're subjected to capital gains taxes, and you can also take the loss as well. So it's not like, oh, there's a law for Bitcoin on how Bitcoin taxes are, and then a very different law for everything else, or it doesn't exist, right? We actually could make a case that there are some cryptocurrencies that should be taxed differently. I would make the case that if you're using a cryptocurrency as currency, so if you're using Bitcoin for payments, it shouldn't be subjected to capital gains. So I think there is a little bit of nuance there. But when we talk about the laws, it's not like, oh, this applies to Bitcoin, and then you have to write a whole nother law for Litecoin, and then write a whole nother law for ETH, and that would take, that's just not how it's done, right? It's for the technology overall.
Okay, well, listen, Perianne, you're brilliant on this subject. I was actually texting Danny during it saying, fucking hell, Perianne's so good at this. Thank you for coming on and doing this. I do want to do another one with you in person at some point, and we will make that happen. If people want to support what you're doing, where do you want them to go to?
You can go to digitalchamber.org, learn more about what we're doing, and you can donate there. And then our Twitter handle is just @digitalchamber.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully we're going to see you soon.
Thanks, Peter.